2018 has seen loud cries against censorship amid the widespread social media bans of controversial Alex Jones, as well as the Facebook suspension of Telesur, a left-leaning government-funded news organization. Twitter recently admitted that hundreds of thousands of users had been shadow banned, blaming it on algorithms.
Our algorithms were unfairly filtering 600,000 accounts, including some members of Congress, from our search autocomplete and latest results.
At the same time, countless individuals and organizations alike claim they've had their exposure throttled. Some claim the companies imposing the bans have every right to do so because they're private. Others claim these companies' widespread collusion with the government, their admissions they've deleted accounts at the request of governments, and their willingness to listen to government-linked organizations like the Atlantic Council in identifying disinformation makes the issue of public versus private less clear-cut. For example, the Atlantic Council's current chairman, James L. Jones, has worked for NATO and the State Department and served as a national security advisor to President Obama. Directors of the Atlantic Council include Henry Kissinger and David Petraeus, and honorary directors include the likes of former Secretary of State Colin Powell, James A. Baker, who worked in the Ford, Reagan, H.W., and W. Bush administrations, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, former CIA Chief Leon Panetta, former Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter, and former Secretary of Defense Robert M. Gates. The truth is that despite the recent wave of bans and suspensions and subsequent claims of censorship has always been part of American history, often in far more blatant ways. It's been present throughout the centuries, and has at times been made possible with the cooperation of private companies. Just over a decade after the founding of the country, the allegedly freedom-oriented government was quick to suppress speech. In 1798, the Sedition Act banned, as History.com has noted, false, scandalous, and malicious writing against Congress or the president, and made it illegal to conspire to oppose any measure or measures of the government. By the 1800s, various laws were used to censor abolitionists, religious minorities, suffragists, labor organizers, and pacifists, and members of the Postal Service were refusing to deliver abolitionist pamphlets to the South. During the Civil War, the Postmaster General refused to deliver newspapers deemed traitorous for expressing alleged Southern sentiments after a New York grand jury ruled against free speech and freedom of the press. Further, Ford Risley, a professor at Penn State with an expertise in Civil War journalism, has said Lincoln wasn't afraid to shut down newspapers. Members of the press also voluntarily withheld information in the name of helping the Union cause. By World War I, war was at the center of official censorship efforts yet again. Woodrow Wilson and Congress passed the Sedition Act, which they viewed as crucial in order to stifle the spread of dissent within the country in that time of war, according to History.com. At the same time, the government had its own program to spread pro-war propaganda. The Espionage Act, too, was used to censor speech and was employed by subsequent leaders, including President Obama, to censor leaks to the press. In a separate example, around the same time, anarchists and communists alike were arrested simply for displaying symbols of their beliefs. The press was censored again during World War II under Franklin Roosevelt, with many journalists happily submitting to aid in the cause. Author John Steinbeck, a reporter at the time, said the rules for correspondence were both imposed and self-imposed, ultimately asserting that their omissions amounted to untruths. At the same time, like in World War I, pro-war propaganda inundated American life. In the Truman years, Congress passed the Smith Act, which made it illegal to conspire to overthrow the government or even encourage doing so, despite the assertion in the Declaration of Independence that it's the people's right and duty to throw off abusive government. During the Vietnam War, the government tried to censor information on its activities, ultimately suing the New York Times and Washington Post and losing. During the Reagan administration, the government banned coverage of its military operations in Grenada, and censorship plagued subsequent administrations while propaganda was widely circulated and attacks on the free flow of information ran rampant. There are many other instances of censorship throughout history, including countless banned books and the censorship of allegedly obscene material through the Comstock laws. Censorship is by no means uniquely American, but as accusations of it today are loud and in many ways justified, it's vital to be aware of the many times it's been imposed, through government and sometimes the voluntary cooperation of private companies, so we can be better informed when it inevitably happens again. Bills accused of censoring the internet have already been proposed and passed in America. Meanwhile, in the EU, industry interests worked with lawmakers to pass Article 13, the meme-killing bill, though free internet advocates aren't giving up. In the digital age, as a handful of tech giants colluding with the state wield ever-increasing power, we're entering a new terrain of suppression, and it's difficult to predict exactly how it'll unfold. Though it's unlikely the government would attempt another round of sedition acts, and most of the instances cited here turned out to be temporary, the threat isn't going away, and it appears a more incremental approach is taking hold. This isn't just about Alex Jones or stifling conservatives, it's about building a new framework for control under the guise of protecting the common good, as many Americans cheer it on. The real reason for increasing censorship, yet again, is that no matter the type of government and no matter how much that government claims to safeguard your freedom, the institution will always try to suppress information and narratives that threaten its power, whether on its own or with the help of industry monoliths, which is all the more reason to reject that power altogether.